My name is Peter Coip. I'm the Director of the Office of Special Education Services at the South Carolina Department of Education. We're just going to talk about school improvement. And we're going to talk about the subgroup of students with disabilities. So you guys are all from districts. How many districts have a school who's an ATSI school because of the subgroup of students with disabilities? Right, pretty much everybody in there. And if we had a room full of every school district in the state, guess what? They'd pretty much raise their hand. So so the question is, how did we get here? And is this, some kind of illusion? Does the data back it up? That we're struggling a little bit with getting our performance for students with disabilities into where it should be. So we're going to talk about, and what I'm going to use is the recently released data from NAEP, the Nation's Report Card. And so this would be 2024 data from NAEP. And then look a little bit at kind of a corollary subject matter, which is, suspension data, looking at in-school and out-of-school suspension for students with disabilities, and just take a little bit of look for that. And then to talk about tips for improving special ed programs. And then if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. So one thing is, if you could just, the key to this movement to start making a difference in moving this is going to be school site administrators. They are key. So some of you, I know, I've been looking on the app, and some of you are school site administrators, but if you go back to your schools, please tell your school site administrators to, I'll be presenting at SCASA. We're likely to put out probably some virtual sessions to discuss this subject, but I really want to talk to school site administrators about what they can do to change school climate, to change the way we look at students with disabilities, and to change the way we instruct them. And these aren't massive changes. A lot of schools do some of these practices already, but there are going to be things that we see that can make a difference. And it really is more about a mindset change than anything else. You're not going to buy it in a box. There's no product that's going to get you to the finish line on this particular issue. But it is a way that we approach students with disabilities and how we educate them that's going to make the difference. So why do we see so many ATSI students? Well, the performance data might shed a little bit of light. So these graphs, I would have made them bigger, but I got it from the NAEP test site, which they have a data tool available, and so this is printed out of this. But this is basically looking at national data and South Carolina data for average scaled scores for non-disabled students and students with IEPs. So two demographics, one that has IEPs, one that doesn't, right? Pretty simple. So the bottom set of lines, those are the lines that represent the students with disabilities. And the top set of lines represent the non-disabled group. And as you would expect, the average scale scores are going to be higher for non-disabled students than they are for students with disabilities. But one thing I wanted to point out is the gap. So on the ELA fourth grade scores in 2004, and I do want to start by saying the NAEP is not a perfect instrument. It is a sampling of students, so it's approximately 10%, but they also do 10% of students with disabilities. So it's not like all school districts participated in the NAEP in 2024, and it's only given every other year for ELA and math. But it does allow us to compare ourselves nationally and look at other states as well. But to get back to this, so we had our higher score a little bit over 220. I think it's 221 is the average scaled score, and that turns out to be the average scale score for the nation and for South Carolina. So our students without IEP pretty much on par with the nation. Now, fortunately for South Carolina, the nation came down, and that was all over the news. Nation's report card. As a nation, we were actually decreasing in our scores for ELA. Some proposed it might be a COVID after effect. There are a lot of theories positive, but the nation went down. So The nation went down. South Carolina held pretty steady for non-disabled, as you can see. So we meet up at that 2024 administration. We're pretty much at the national average for fourth grade ELA scaled score. But if you look at students with disabilities, we started bridging the gap a little bit up to 2022, but then 2024 we fall below again. So we're significantly below the national average for comparing our apples to apples students with disabilities on the NAEP. And so this is one way you look at it. Another way is to look at the percentage of students who are scoring below basic or at grade level, basically, for NAEP. So this one is reversed. So the higher ones is the percentage of students with IEPs. And as you can see, and the lower one is non-disabled peers. And as you can see, South Carolina is about at the national average for those scoring above at basic or above, or those scoring below basic. And but for students with disabilities, where South Carolina is in gray, we're once again behind the nation if you look at it this way. So now let's turn to another one. So they do ELA fourth grade, ELA eighth grade. They do math, fourth grade math, eighth grade. So I just picked a few. I'll give you all the ones in the next couple slides. But if you look at the national data for the scaled scores for non-disabled students and students with IEPs, once again, what we see is the state is lagging a little bit behind on the scaled scores for non-disabled students, but they're significantly below for students with disabilities. So what you can draw from these is it's pretty clear that our gap here in South Carolina between our students who don't have IEPs and our students that do have IEPs is significant, and it's a bigger gap than what we're seeing nationally and in other states. And so this shows you over time, and at times we've narrowed the gap between the nation and South Carolina, but we've never reached that. And at some points we're regressing. Like I said, on fourth grade ELA, we've gone down to 19% basic and above, which lags behind the nation at 26%. So we've been significantly below if you look at the percentages. And math is even a little bit more disturbing because we went down to 10% for eighth grade in this most recent administration, creating a gap between us and the national average of 23%. So a 13% percentage gap, which is the biggest that we've seen in the last 4 administrations. So it's also not trending well. So what can we do about it? Is it an impossible task? Probably not. I think we can. So one thing is to look at is just kind of the obvious, which is students won't be learning if they're not in the instruction. And students with disabilities are excluded from instruction more than any other students. And this is the percentage. And what this is this is a percentage of students who have IEPs who are suspended in a given year, in an academic year. And for non-disabled peers, it's probably going to be about 6%, maybe 7%. But for students with disabilities, it's 7%. Almost 3 times as likely if you're a student with an IEP that you're going to be suspended at some point during the year than a non-disabled student. And this is just counting 1 day or more. So some of these students had multiple days, some of these students, but we only count a student once. It's an unduplicated set. We don't look at how many days in this particular graphic. I'm not examining, how many days of suspension total that students with disabilities get. I'm just saying how many get 1 day or more, how many are taken out of instruction, removed from instruction for at least a day. And then the other one is the in-school suspension. So most likely part of the school day. And we have that also being high. So and this is trending in the wrong direction as well. Back in 2018-19, before COVID hit, we had set a goal to bring this down to single digits. I mean, we really felt that as a state we should be suspending students with IEPs less than 10% of the student population that we had, and we thought that was a doable goal for the state. And You'll notice we don't have the COVID year because they were really low that year. You know why? Because nobody was in school. It's hard to suspend somebody online. You're suspended, right? Turn off your computer. So we took that out because that really wasn't a year you could look at. So we started to make some progress pre-COVID, and then afterwards we saw it going up again. And part of it could be, some of the effects of COVID, right? Kids have come back. We've seen some more significant behavioral issues. We've seen a lot of school disruptions. And so it's going, but this is something we've got to take hold of as a state, and make an effort to bring down. And I still think it's very doable to bring this into single digits, and other states have done it. And we can, but it's got to be a focus. It's got to be an effort. It's got to be a change in mindset, to use non-exclusionary disciplinary practices in order to address the problems that occur in the classroom. And many of the issues we see, if you examine your incident management reports, if you look in PowerSchool, there are a lot of what you would call nonviolent, non-threatening, non-disruptive actions and things that are leading to suspensions. And we need to look at those first. If we can keep the child in instruction, we should. Plain and simple. And there's a lot of instances where they're being excluded where they shouldn't be. So that's one of the things. But I'm going to talk about three things, which is a change in the way we approach things. Potentially for some schools. And some schools are doing some of this, and this may not be at your schools. You may decide, we're already implementing most of this stuff, we're doing it. But the first thing is to ask the fundamental question. Because most of the students who receive special education services are going to be in general education more than 80% of the day, right? It's a vast majority, actually. It's about 70%. So the vast majority of students with IEPs are in general education more than 80% of the day. So they're getting their primary instruction in general ed. And that's the way it should be, absolutely. So one of the fundamental questions you want to ask yourself at your school is the specialized instruction for those students, is it supplementing the instruction, the general ed instruction? So they're receiving their core instruction in general ed. Are we supplementing that in the specialized instruction room, or are we contradicting it? That's the worst case scenario. Or are we teaching something totally different so that the child is almost looking at two sets of curriculum, two sets of problems, two sets of ways of attacking, let's say, math problems? They're getting double homework, and we've seen it happen. The instruction isn't coordinated. It isn't complementing one another. And at times it's contradicting. And it's a simple question. Look at it. How is the instruction aligned? Does it supplement what the child is learning? Are we doing, what we should be doing, particularly at the early grades for ELA? We know it's repetition, right? It's going to be relearning. It's going to be additional practice. But it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. We're just reinforcing it. We're giving the child more opportunities to learn, more opportunities to practice, more explicit instruction in that smaller setting, that individual setting, to supplement and reinforce what they've already learned in the general ed classroom. And I know that sounds simple, but it's not always being done. I guarantee you. If you look closely at your classrooms, you're going to find that at times they're doing completely contradictory instruction in the special ed classroom to that what they're giving in the general. So that's the first thing. And then to do that, the second part is just a piece of that, is at the school site level, and particularly for our school site administrators, and you know why I'm trying to preach this to school site administrators, we've got to facilitate that planning and collaboration. And it can be complicated. And we're asking for something that's a little bit selfish if you're an advocate for special education, and you're saying, hey, when you do your master scheduling, start with special ed. It's the most complex. So, but you should start there. If you want to make improvement, you got to start there. You start your planning with special ed and your special ed classes and your special ed teachers, and you try to create a master plan and a planning schedule that's going to allow for that planning and collaboration between general ed and special ed. Without that communication, it's a no-go. It just stops. It's just, you need to have that, and that is going to make sure that it's supplementing, right? If your general ed teachers and your special ed teachers are in tune, and if you do co-teaching at your school, even better. I mean, that model of instruction mandates collaboration. There's no way to do it without some type of collaboration. But even if you don't, you can still have that planning and collaboration, and it's necessary. If the teachers are going to work together, and they're going to do that reinforcement and that additional practice on the core curriculum that's being taught in the general ed classroom, they're going to need to be in touch and know, when are you covering this? When are you covering these skills? When is it covered during general education? Special ed teachers should know that, so that they're supplementing it with the student, making sure they're doing those reinforcement activities so that the child can stay in tune and can address those weaknesses that might be holding them back from accessing that general ed curriculum. And the final thing, and based upon the stats that I was just showing you, is you got to make it a goal at the school site level to reduce the number of times that students are removed from instruction. You just got to make it a goal. You got to say, look, we're going to do this. And I'll tell you what, I worked for a little while for LA Unified. And this is kind of an extreme measure, but at the time, what we did is we identified the highest suspending schools in the district, 50 highest suspending schools in the district, and we published it. And then what we did is we took those administrators from those schools and we said, you're going to spend a week with an administrator from a school with the same demographics whose suspension rate is half of yours. And you're going to see what that culture is like. You're going to see what that school culture is like. You're going to see the proactive behavior supports that they put into place to avoid removing those kids from school. And it was powerful. A lot of those administrators, they learned a lot from these other administrators who had changed the philosophy at their schools, who had changed the way they approach students with disabilities and the way they approach discipline in their school settings. And so that's just an example of it. But I mean, here we don't have that mechanism unless the districts decide to do that. And maybe your district will decide to do that. I don't know. It's fairly harsh to publish the list, but you know, at the end of the day, I do think it takes the mindset of administration, because you know, we used to see, and this was one of my most hated goals as we went out and reviewed IEP goals and IEPs individually. There would be goals in student IEPs that they would reduce the number of disciplinary referrals. That was the student's goal. And we said, whoa, last time we checked, the student never wrote a referral. I mean, that can't be their goal. Now, they can work on their behavior. They can work on strategies to be more in tune with instruction, to be more engaged. You can work on things like that, but the goals should be related to the student's conduct and something the student can effectuate change on. But they don't write disciplinary referrals. So yeah, we told them we don't ever want to see that goal again. That is an adult goal. That's a goal for the administrators. That is not a goal for the student. So, but that is what we're asking. We're asking for that IEP goal for administrators. Reduce your discipline. Yeah.
Whenever we're talking about IEP goals, a lot of times in reviewing our district IEP goals, it's not an on-grade level goal. So, do you recommend the IEP set on grade level goals, or do you like to bridge the gap goals? Because if so, then a lot of times during their resource time is to help them meet that one, but to help them meet those goals, it might not be on grade levels. I think in our district that it's almost like, because we're thinking about it under school improvement side, and our specs thinking about it as each child is a different individualized plan. And a lot of times, not to say that we butt heads, but we, you know, it's almost like we can't agree because we don't feel like the two, like we're really saying the same thing. So what is your take on IEP goals? Should they be more on grade level goals?
That is a great question, and I'm gonna reframe it in a certain way. So it's not whether it should be grade level or not, but what you should be focused on is rate of improvement. So if I'm taking a child, what we've come to accept in the state is if the child I'm working with is below grade level, and I'm more worried about, let's break that down to what the score looks like on the particular assessment, and maybe look at reading proficiency, and let's try to get the rate. But what we need to look at is a better rate of improvement, because we've been accepting rate of improvement and saying this child's 2 grades below grade level, and I'm going to write a goal so that they increase at the same level as their non-disabled peers. That maintains the gap. You will never stop the gap. So what we have to do is to increase our rate of improvement. And so if the child's 2 grades behind, they're going to have to make up a grade and a half, right? Or something of that nature. Their improvement rate has to increase at a rate that they're lessening the gap between them and their non-disabled peers. And some special ed teachers are reluctant to do that because they're like, well, then I don't want to set my student up for failure. I like at the end of the year to say you've met your goal. Well, this is the tough one, but this allows you to say, look, we're not telling you have to use the grades level standards necessarily if that's not where the child is at. And that's an IEP team decision to use, let's say the grade below materials, at least at the beginning. But what you want to do is to promote speeding that up. Like, okay, we may start there, but we're going to start to progress up a grade level, because our end goal is to get the child at grade level, not to maintain this distance. And so that's how I would shift it with them. So it shifts the conversation to saying, well, let's back this up and look not so much at where the grade level is that their starting point is, but our rate of improvement, and are we making a difference in bridging the gap between them and their non-disabled peers. So that's my suggestion, is just reframing the conversation and making it more about rate of improvement. Yeah.
So when you're working on the state level with various districts on the special education side, is this kind of thing what is being communicated to them?
Yeah.
So here's my next question. Can you give me or us some pointers for helping us out with that? Because it seems like when we, with ATSI School Improvement, try to promote collaborative planning and the student belonging to both the general education and special education teachers or educators, we have tried a lot of things, but it just seems that they have different, we can't get them on the same page to understand why it's so important.
Yeah, and that is hard. I mean, I do think, like I said, sometimes we found it's hard to get the school site administrators on board, because they got to set that climate at the get-go to say, that's the leadership at the school. They've got to say to both sets. And the interesting thing is we've heard it for both sides. I mean, special education teachers kept telling us for a long time that they don't have a seat at the table. And so, we'd hear that, and then most recently we've heard from general education teachers that the special ed teachers are siloed off and they won't listen to us. So we're hearing it from both sides. I don't discount either of them. I think that there's the feelings on both sides have some legitimacy, and they've had some historical context to that. So getting them, I don't have any perfect remedy for getting them together. I usually beat them over the head with the data, and saying this is an imperative, and we are not instructing our students with disabilities as well as we can. And these two groups getting together is the only way we're going to change that. And, but I convincing them, sometimes you come in with the data and say the way that we're instructing them is not working. But I also try to look at opportunities, and I do see that we are at kind of the beginning of a very good opportunity, which is we just adopted new ELA standards, we just adopted new math standards. And why do I think that's important, particularly for the ELA, but both of them? The ELA standards are a lot more skill-based. When you start putting it in skill-based language, you're speaking special ed language. because special ed should be about skills, right? That's what we're trying to identify is what are those skill deficits that are keeping that child from the general ed curriculum, right? Succeeding in it. I mean, that's the very purpose of special education. So I love the new standards. I think it's scaffolded well, and I think it's skill-based, which lends itself to making good goals. It lends itself. Now, should I copy and paste a standard or an indicator underneath the standards? No. But what you do is it should be based on it. It's easy to take the skills that are embedded in those indicators and the standards and then say, okay, well, I can make a goal out of that. And make it specific to the child, creating a baseline and a target. And once again, looking at rate of improvement, your baseline to target for your annual goal should be a significant enough rate of improvement that you're bridging the gap.
I think there's a question about why should the IEP goals be like possibly grade level, but if you're listing the behaviors and skills, you can do the progression of the behaviors and skills. If I'm working on my child is in 3rd grade, but the child's performing kindergarten, that means maybe in my IEP goal, they should establish the skills and behaviors that progress toward that. I taught special ed for 7 years, but I've been out of it for a while. So I've not, I've been out of it, but I always focused on the progression of standards for my kids because the approach that I was currently taking was never, ever going to get them where they were supposed to be. But if I focus on that particular progression, I can introduce as they master. So that was my approach. But I do feel like possibly there could be IEP goals that when they write them, it may not specifically say, child be exposed to first, because that's not a child's goal to be exposed to 3rd grade standards. But if I'm giving them skills and behaviors that would reflect where they should be, then you still can measure it. I mean,
I think you're 100% right. I mean, because, and that's why I get out the grade level thing. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm not a huge fan of the words average either. I used it in the data thing, but that's because Nate uses it. There's a great book called End of Average by Todd Rhodes. Anyway, it makes an argument about why that statistic is significantly flawed in the field of education, yet we use it all the time. But you're spot on, and I think that's what we need to look at is, do they have the fundamental skills? And you want to work at building that foundation of skills. And we know what it is based on the science of reading, what skills are necessary, what phonemic awareness, the phonics that they need in order to achieve at the grade level. And we now have ELA standards that basically scaffold the skill set like you're talking about. So you progress from this skill to this skill to this skill to this skill, and this will make you a fluent reader. And so that should be the focus, and that rate of improvement to make sure that we're getting there, rather than, honestly, it's not going to matter a ton whether they're using a 2nd grade reading text or a 3rd grade reading text at the end of the day. We do need to make sure that they're getting those fundamental skills and that repetition and that explicit instruction to increase their rate of improvement, so that basically we want them to outpace their non-disabled peers. And that should be the goal. And some of it is just setting higher expectations. So how do you complement general ed instruction? I mean, first of all, you don't remove them. And I think we've eradicated most of this in schools. We would see IEPs from time to time where you had a student with a learning disability and they would be removed for resource from the very class they were struggling with. And we're saying, please don't do that. And we've been for a while. And like I said, we're not seeing a lot of that now. But you don't remove a child from reading and then go put them in the resource room to do reading. You keep them in the general ed instruction reading, and then you supplement it with resources. Right? That makes sense. I mean, I know you guys are probably well beyond that, but I'm just stating the obvious just in case somebody didn't catch that. And the other one is use the high quality instructional materials. I mean, we are promoting that. You're going to hear it over and over again. The agency is like big on this. We just spent a heck of a lot of money on high quality instructional materials for ELA and math. All of those ones, particularly if you dig into the elementary level, the ELA high quality instruction materials, you're going to see that they have tiered instruction embedded in it. You don't need to go on the internet. You don't need to buy anything else. Your special ed teachers can be using the same high quality instructional materials that your general ed teachers are doing. And they could even get some like I said, tier 2, tier 3, even though special ed is technically kind of tier 4, you can utilize those tier 2, tier 3 materials when you're doing your instruction in the research. So continue to use it. And by the way, your special ed teachers electronically have access to all grade levels. I'm sure you guys know that. They can get it. Now, you're only going to get one hard copy if you got some old schoolers who are like, I only work with paper copies of books, right? Not too many of those. I mean, I like looking at books, but if I have to, I'll go digitally, right? And we've all gotten used to Kindles and everything else. But the bottom line is that your special ed teachers have access to all the grade levels that they'll be able to, that they're teaching. So if they're teaching students from, third, fourth, fifth, they're going to have access to the instructional materials for all grade levels. They won't get the hard copy, but one copy probably. But if your school or your district wants to purchase that for your special ed teachers, you can. It would just have to be purchased by the district. But they do have digital access. So there's no excuse for them not to use those materials. But you do want to make sure that they know about the instructional hub, that they go there, and that they access it for all the grades that they are. And then this was the final one, and you guys beat me to it by talking about it. But basically, your goals for reading ELA and math should align with the indicators in the state standards. And we say align. It's not a cut and paste because you got to individualize it to the student because it's an IEP goal. But it should be the sets of skills that are necessary, that are basically laid out in those indicators, because it does lay out skills. And there's other resources that can be used for, let's say if a student needs more math problems to work on and doing it. I mean, Khan Academy is a great resource for that. It's got a database of problems for all sorts of math problems, pretty much at any level, any grade level. So if you need additional practice, because that's what should be going on in resource. Once again, explicit instruction, repetition, and extra practice for the same stuff that's being taught in GNOA. For facilitating collaboration, like I said before, start your scheduling with special education. Look to see if you can adjust your planning periods to allow for more collaboration between special ed and general ed. Incorporate those staff and professional learning days. Sometimes it's like, here's the special ed learning day. You were teaching back when you were teaching today. Did they separate it? Was it like one step?
Oh, it wasn't that long. I mean, but it was limited collaboration unless I initiated.
But were you in the professional learning for general ed? The days, the set aside days.
We had special ed PD, and then if you had time to go to.
And I think that takes an effort to do more of that, to try to get away from, okay, we have special ed, professional PDs, and we have general ed PDs. There needs to be more combined PDs. If you want to move the needle, if you want to promote collaboration between it, and then set up the ones. I mean, people are setting up, groups, communication groups, Google groups, depending on whatever technology is used at the school, facilitating that at the administrative level, at the school level, saying, here's a tool that can be used so you guys can talk to each other. And I mean, some of it's going to be done through text. But this is the type of thing, promoting that, saying we want our general ed and our special ed teachers talking together because they're teaching the same students. They're responsible for the same students. Reducing removals. If your school sites don't already have it, you should have a positive behavior support system in place. I don't know if you got your paw bucks or your, I mean, I've seen all kinds of creative names, and I go to some schools and I'm like, I'd see they would have like the display case of the things you could get if you get enough paw bucks from different things and stuff. I've always thought that was neat. I wanted to get the Superman cake, but it's just me. But and then the other things are some of those little plastic toys you get at McDonald's, but I'm not sure that gave great incentive. But you also want to make sure that at your school site, and this is kind of where school administrators, once again, I'm not expecting that they would memorize the behavior intervention plans for all the students who have behavior intervention plans at their school, but they should be able to access it. If you're a school administrator and you can't access that, because that's going to become pertinent information mighty fast, especially if the student goes into crisis, right? And a lot of times they have some behavioral techniques written into the behavior intervention plans, and some of them are quite good, but they don't get used. Because guess what? The people intervening didn't know about it. Well, you got to do that. That gets you in trouble a lot of different ways. That gets you in trouble legally because something happens with the kid, and so that's my background. I'm a school attorney, so I actually represented school districts for a number of years. I also worked for Disability Rights South Carolina, representing families. So I'm one of the few attorneys that's on both sides. It might make you a traitor, might make you anyway. It makes you interesting, but to me, it makes you well-rounded. But the bottom line is, you gotta follow. If you come up with these plans to address the child's behavior, and some students absolutely they need a behavioral intervention plan, right? And we're working on strategies, we're working on techniques. But if you're going to take the effort to do a functional behavior assessment, which is probably one of the hardest assessments that can be done, and you're going to go ahead and do that, and you're going to come up with strategies and plans to address that child's behavior, for God's sake, use it, please. That's a lot of work has been put into that. So anyway, that's another thing. But that will, and sometimes we're finding that these kids get suspended because their behavior intervention plans are not being implemented. So the other one is set clear expectations. And this can be hard to do for an administrator, because some of the teachers will push back and say, "You're not supporting me, right? You're not supporting me when I need your help." But I think you got to set that. Like, what is referral worthy? Go over that with your teachers, right? You got to set the standards. And I'm saying setting them higher, because we can't exclude these kids from instruction. The reliance on suspensions and expulsions it doesn't work. You're not going to see results if you can do that. And I'm not saying that there aren't particular situations that warrant a suspension. I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that that you won't have any expulsions, but the numbers are way too high. There are a lot of offenses, as we call them, that don't warrant excluding that child from instruction. And guess what? I mean, we all know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be like, "Hey, I'm going to punish you by giving you a day off from school." I mean, most kids are going to be like, "Yippee. I got suspended. My mom took me shopping." I mean, it was kind of a silly suspension, but nevertheless, it's not necessarily it's not a productive form of punishment. Most kids don't react to it to go, "Okay, well, I'm going to stop." So let's get rid of the ones that we don't have to use that kind of exclusionary discipline. And that's what I mean by exclusionary. It's the ones that take them out, take them away from instruction, that type of discipline. And sometimes they need to cool off for a little bit, but you get them back in as soon as you can. That's the point. The other one is promoting those proactive strategies to address those needs. Teaching the student, working with them, coming up with scenarios. Those are good things. And if the student needs a behavioral goal in their IEP, great. But make sure you're providing that instruction, providing that student with the strategies. A lot of times they just need to know how to cope. They need to know how to deal with certain situations, and you can go through that in the special ed classroom and talk about it. All right, some other things. If you guys want to look at different data, it's not just the NAEP data, but I did put that up there, the website. So these are some of the things, because I know it was asked, like, how can you do it? Like I said, I don't know that my approach always works, but I pound people with data. It's just the reality. You just say, look, show me something different. Show me how our students with disabilities are outperforming any other subgroup. Show me that. You can't find that data. It doesn't exist. So you show them just what it is. And you can go to the state website if you want to look at your school. Sometimes it's hard for when you go down to that subgroup. It depends on your school sizes. It's because if you get less than the mandatory N size of 20, you're just going to get a blank column if you're looking at students with disabilities. But otherwise, if you do hit that minimum threshold, you're going to see the breakdown on SC Ready as far as students who are meets and exceeds, and whether they're approaching or below that, right? So you can look it up for your school, and that's one way to look at it for all your schools. You can look at it by district and by school on that website. The other thing is encourage we just moved to the IEP software system. I'm sure you guys know that. Probably a lot of bad things. Don't throw anything at me. But that was done through an RFP. You know, it was done through an RFP. But anyway, this system's going to be good. You just got to be patient. But I do expect, just like with Enrich, we started to get our school site administrators really to use that. When you go on to the dashboard, it's got a number of things. A lot of them are compliance things. The school site administrators should be looking at that regularly to see, you know, are we getting things done on time? What's the breakdown of my students by disability category? What's the breakdown by percentage of time with non-disabled peers? And then looking at their test scores. I mean, that's you should at the bottom line, you should care. And the principals, if they want to move at and they want to get out of being an ATSI school for the subgroup of students with disabilities, you've got to make it a priority that we're going to move the needle on this. We are going to go after this subgroup and make sure that they're getting the instruction they need. And you should be managing your incident management. If you start seeing kids creeping up 3-4 days of suspension, well, let's take a look at that. Do we need to convene the IEP team? Do we need to talk about it? Do we need to add some behavioral goals? Do we need to look at the BIP and revise it? Because this student's creeping up, and guess what? They're going to creep out towards that magic number of 10 pretty fast. So we always try to tell school site administrators, you know, get a beat on that and start to see which students are escalating. And the other one is just a link to the instructional hub, but each district has its own login for that. So, but just to make sure that you're using it. All right, well, that's all I got. So unless you got some questions, you can head for the door. Hopefully, I've persuaded you to focus on these students, and that's the only way to get out. Thank you.